Mombasa 87.9, Kisumu 102.5, 96.0 in Nakuru, 96.7 in Eldoret, 90.9 in Nyeri, 97.7 in Malindi, and also for choosing to watch us on www.spicefm.co.ke or via our social media handles. We are live streaming on YouTube, SpiceFM.ke, Facebook, SpiceFM.ke, as well as live streaming on Twitter, SpiceFM.ke. Let's bring the conversation back to what we discussed yesterday, and this was the story of Miss Beatrice Mwende. Miss Beatrice Mwende is now in police custody, and she's accused of killing her 4 children in Naivasha on Saturday. She appeared before a Naivasha court yesterday, and then she was able to speak out, and she says, "The devil made me do it." After spending 2 nights in police cells, Beatrice Mwende said reality has hit her and she is yet to come to terms with her deeds, which she termed as demonic. Speaking before she was arraigned in court in Naivasha, the mother of 7 asked for mercy, saying she was possessed and did not know what she was doing. So she gives the chronology of what happened. She says they were having supper together with the children and even watched TV before the children, whom I loved so much, went to bed, only for the evil spirits to take over. The 42-year-old says her boyfriend, whom they parted ways last year, would take control over her, ordering her to do all manner of queer things during their relationship. She claims that on the 26th day of every month, she'd be possessed by evil spirits that commandeered her to do all kinds of deeds that she was not in control of. "I've never loved anyone so much, and on this night, he took control of me, and I strangled my children one after the other before laying them on their beds." This was an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old. They were found dead on their beds next to each other. Melody and Willie were students at Milimani Primary School in Eldoret. Remember, what she also did is on that Saturday morning, she left a note behind as she left the house.
Yeah.
And she had written to the first 3 children, the firstborn of the other 3 children whom she had in a previous marriage, and she had left them elsewhere in that previous marriage that had not worked. And she was telling that firstborn son, "This is what I've done, and I'd like you to take care of your siblings, your left siblings. I had to kill these ones because of what I've gone through in life, everything else that's happening to me." Now, she talks about how after she did this the following morning, she got up and went to Naivasha town to look for this boyfriend that she talks about. And when she said that when she saw the boyfriend, she felt so relieved and lighter on seeing him before proceeding to a bar where they always met. And that's where the police came for her. When we were discussing this story, we were looking at various angles. We're looking at the angle of, look, what exactly is it that happened to lead this woman to kill her children? She narrates in her own words, she talks about the kind of hardship that she's gone through after losing her job in these COVID-19 times and being unable to properly take care of her family. She was running into rent arrears. She claims that she also was running into electricity arrears. She claims that she was unable to continuously feed her family properly. And she was just saying, "This is the end for me." Now she tells a different story here where she's sounds completely, if you just listen to her, you're like, okay, wait. Who are we talking to here?
Is it the same
She
person?
says, "The devil made me do it." The boyfriend would possess her on every 26th, would make her do strange things that she's not aware of. And when we pushed this story further yesterday, we were like, okay, there's a part of government that is failing here. There's a part of government that is not upholding its end of the bargain on what it's supposed to be doing in terms of social protection. So this morning, let's speak to somebody who's an expert on this. And this is Dr. Annette Mbogoh. She is the executive director of Kituo Sheria. She has experience. She's a teacher of law. She understands gender law, children's law, public interest law. And so she's very much, well versed in talking about this particular matter. Dr. Mbogoh, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Thank you very much for speaking to us. You are the executive director of Kituo Sheria. Before we get into this conversation, just briefly tell everybody who's listening, what is Kituo Sheria and what does it do?
Okay. Thank you so much for having me today morning on the show. So Kituo Sheria is a non-governmental organization. We are an access to justice organization that mainly focuses on promoting rights and access to justice for poor and marginalized communities. So we have specific programs that seek to achieve this. This is done through legal support and assistance that is provided by our legal officers who work in-house. We also work very closely with volunteer advocates who provide free legal services to our clients. Then we have a program that works mainly around advocacy and governance, where we train communities to understand the law, and we train them as paralegals so that they can respond to the legal issues within their communities. And these paralegals then set up justice centers within their communities so that they can provide first aid in legal matters. Where matters are very technical, then they would refer them to Kituo. Then we have an what we call Mhaki platform. This is an SMS platform where the public can send messages to, and the legal inquiries would be responded to by our advocates. And we work also around forced migration, where we work together with refugees and asylum seekers to provide them legal protection. And generally, we seek to ensure that government it complies with the obligations that it has under the Constitution, mainly to ensure that everyone has access to justice. Yeah.
Great, Dr. Mbogoh. So the Kituo cha Sheria really does quite a bit of work just by hearing what you're saying. And therefore, you also have experience dealing with such matters like this one of Beatrice Mwenda. You've seen the story. It came out on Saturday and Sunday. It was covered extensively yesterday and also today. Just looking at the facts as they're coming out now, from your trained legal mind, what do you read here?
I read many things just by hearing the story. I also would want to note so that because the matter is pending in court, we cannot delve into a lot of the issues in the court matter. But just from my own assessment, we find that there may have been a mental health issue where the accused person, in this case, the mother of these children, may have been acting possibly under mental health condition, which may have affected her faculties. Normally, the court process is that before someone takes plea, then they would be subjected to an assessment of their psychiatric condition. And it is on the basis of this psychiatric evaluation that then the court would know how to proceed with the matter. So even as we await the outcome of the psychiatric evaluation, there are many options that will present themselves. One is that if indeed the court finds that she's unable to withstand a court trial because of her psychiatric health, then the court can proceed and make a special finding on the basis of the facts that have been presented. I think there's been a lot of conversation also around her even being interviewed by the media as to what exactly happened in stories. But the court will need to hear from her based on the facts that have been presented, possibly once the plea has been done, so that then, based on the finding, they can make a special finding which will say she can be found guilty and insane. So when you're found guilty and insane, that just means that you are technically acquitted, but then you are forced to undergo mental treatment within a government facility. But if the psychiatric evaluation then reveals that she is fit to stand trial, then she'll have to stand trial and she'll have to defend herself in the course of the trial. As lawyers, we normally require clients not to plead guilty when they are standing a trial, especially of this nature, because it's up to the prosecution then to prove its case. So if she pleads not guilty, then the court will go through the normal court procedures and then come up with a decision at the end of the trial. So I also see that we need to balance also the perspectives of the mother of these children who, as we can see from the story that's out in the media, that there seems not to have been the presence of the father of these children.
Yeah.
So my question also has been, where was the father? Because if when it comes to parental responsibility, it cuts across both mother and father.
Mm-hmm.
So it is clear that she was raising these children by herself with no support from the father of the children. There's only mention of a boyfriend. I don't know, the boyfriend was the father of these children.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously then she was carrying a very heavy load to take care of 4 children on her own. So I think that also needs to be considered. And at the same time, we look also at the lives of the children who have now been lost. And the responsibility here is also upon the state, because under the Children Act, the state has the ultimate responsibility to protect children. So even though parents have a legal obligation, the ultimate and primary responsibility lies with the government. And so where children were staying with a parent who clearly then was unfit and unable to provide for the needs of the child and the children, and so maintain a safe environment for those children, then the state also has failed in protecting these children.
Right. Let me tell you now what we see from our layman's. Now, this is your legal expertise that's looking at the matter. From where we see it as laymen, we're looking at it from before Saturday to what she talks about in her story, what she wrote on that note to her eldest son. She talks about the inability to fend for her family. She talks about the challenges that she's gone through after losing her job. She talks about wishing that those children that are left, at least because they are living with another family, they're able to grow up well, but because she's been unable to take care of these ones that she has, the 4 of them. So for us, we were even discussing it yesterday, we were looking at it from that angle of the social protection and the state's responsibility in social protection, especially now during this COVID-19 pandemic, which has an impact on the economy. And we went even into Article 43 of the Constitution. It talks about economic, social, and cultural rights. And the state has an obligation to its citizens to ensure that this is possible. Well, yes, it's progressive and all, but what options did she have of accessing some of these rights?
Yeah, so the options she had, as you have rightly mentioned, is that Article 43 provides for the social and economic rights, including right to food, right to health, right to social security, and others, and right to education. And the catch here is that the implementation of these social economic rights is progressive. So if we look at how the courts have defined progressive implementation, then what it means is that state only has an obligation to show us and show the court that steps have been taken to realize social and economic rights. So steps here can mean adopting policies, adopting action plans, and then setting in place mechanisms that would ensure the realization of social and economic rights. So we have a case where this particular lady had options because we have a social protection policy. The social protection policy that Kenya has makes provision for things like cash transfers, the NHIF, NSSF. All these are kind of mechanisms that are available for the public so that they can be able to, in a sense, enjoy an extent of those socioeconomic rights. Obviously, we know that the situation on the ground is not as it is on paper. And so if these mechanisms that have been put in place are not effective to ensure that every person has access to these mechanisms that the country has put in place. We wish there's a case that was determined in court where the court said that where the government is able to show, because we are in a situation where Kenya may have limited resources to ensure that everyone has a right to food or everyone has a right to health. Everyone has a right to education. So where the state then has an obligation to balance the interest of the larger community with those limited resources and the interest now of individual people. So it's a very tricky and gray situation, but obviously any person who feels that their rights have been violated has a right to go to court, to the High Court, and challenge the violation of this right. And institutions like Kituo have handled cases like that, where you can actually file a constitutional reference in court challenging government for failure to put in place mechanisms that will realize socioeconomic rights.
You say that the government has the ultimate responsibility for ensuring the safety and welfare of children.
Yes.
Now, what are these mechanisms that you would say the government currently has actually put in place to ensure that this mandate that they have is actually fulfilled?
At the moment we have what we call the Children's Office. The Children's Office is the main institution that starts with ensuring protection of the rights of children. It's a government institution and it's rolled out up to sub-county level. So any child who is in danger, in need of care and protection, or a parent who feels that they are unable to take care of their children alone, and the other parent needs to also step up and take on their responsibility, can present their case before the Children's Office, their nearest Children's Office, and the Children's Office would be able to address this issue by way of one, they would do mediation between the parents if both parents are there, or if a child needs to be removed from the family which is posing a danger to their life, then that the Children's Office can actually remove the child from that environment and take them to a safe place. A safe place can be an orphanage or any institution or charitable children's institution that again is recognized by government. So the Children's Office is one such office that government has set in place. And
how many of these offices do we have, and at what level are they?
Children's offices are spread across the country, and they are at the level, up to sub-county level. So beyond that, obviously, because we've had a challenge in terms of personnel in the children's department. So we've had instances where some sub-counties may not have an officer, or they're not devolved right to the ward level. So most of the times you'd find that they'd be devolved up to sub-county level.
Okay, so now this is, just from what you've explained, this is more in times of when there's conflict between two parents, or there's conflict in the home where caregivers now are not expending their duty or responsibility. And because of that, then a child is affected. Now, if we look at where a caregiver is not able to provide for their children, just as an example, and we talked about the structure that is then available, or in most cases, unavailable in the country, to make sure that these children are taken care of. Does such exist? Can I go somewhere? Can I go to a chief's office, a subdivision of this same children's office, whether the state department, and say, look, I have been out of work for 2 weeks, 2 months. I don't have sustenance. Is there somebody who can help me? Do we have something like that exists right now?
At the moment, we don't have something where you can go and ask for provision, for example, of basic necessities. Although you can go, for instance, to the court and ask the court for the other parent to take up responsibility, and you'd be asking that that other parent be compelled to make provision for the child because you're unable to do it yourself. But where you are a parent and you're completely unable, then you can actually report to the Children's Office. And the Children's Office, because then that would be a child in need of care and protection, can actually take those children out of that environment and take them to a place where their needs can be provided for.
Sorry, Dr. Mbogoh, if we look at it practically, you've just basically told us, yes, in terms of what the state is expected to do, the state is expected to provide these rights progressively. And by progressively, it can demonstrate that, well, we have come up with policy, we've come up with legislation, we've set up offices. However, should it end there, or should it end to a point where we are saying the government is making that effort to ensure that if you've come up with a children's office at a sub-county level, this we are talking about a constituency. So in a constituency, you have one children's office, and you know the vastness of a constituency. The next thing that you ought to do is ensure that there is information to everybody that this is where the office is and this is what the services that you can get from the office. Do we have that? And we don't even need to answer that question. I'll tell you, no, we don't.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, we actually don't, and many people do not know where to go when they're faced with such situations. So I think there's a need to really, and NGOs like ourselves need to really enhance awareness. Where can people go when they have these situations?
Okay.
Most of that, yes.
Before I go to ask then what then NGOs and even organizations like Kituo would then be able to do, I still want to go back to this issue where you say that, you know, if somebody presents with children that they're not able to feed, food, shelter, clothing, basic necessities, and we say that maybe the court can compel somebody, then the other parent, to provide. What if there's no other parent? What if this is a single mother, for example, or a single father, or somebody is single by virtue of death?
Or the other parent is unable.
The other parent is unable as well. It's also destitute. What happens?
Yeah. Well, you see, the issue about the other parent being unable, you know, if you're a parent, you cannot tell the court that I'm unable to take care of my children. So you must at least show that you can provide to a certain extent. But in the situation that you described, where there is no one else completely to take care of the children, and the current person who is with custody is also unable to take care of the children, then as I mentioned earlier, the ultimate responsibility lies with the state in such situations, and the court can declare that this child is a child in need of care and protection, and if need and care and protection means that the state can take up the child and put them in an institution where the children can be taken care of. Because then the parent has demonstrated that they are totally unable to carry out their responsibility. And this then would be whether it's a children's home or or guardianship. We have situations where we can allow guardianship, where another person can take on that responsibility on behalf of the parent who is currently unable to do so, for a particular period of time as reviewed by the court. Okay. So there are many other ways that it can happen. I'm not saying that it's always effective, because as you've mentioned earlier, that people may not even know that they have these options available to them. And so there's that sense of feeling overwhelmed and like you have no other way out in such a situation.
Okay. Speaking from experience, I've had to, you know, hold hands of people who've actually had to go through the children's office, for example. And we can talk about these things now as if it's kind of like a light switch that goes on and then tomorrow this thing is sorted out. These things take months to figure out. Some of the resolutions that you've mentioned take months to figure out, bringing in a guardian, handing them over to the protection of the state, this, that, the other thing. Let's bring in a situation that is one that the entire country, the world is going through right now. People have been rendered jobless. People don't have means of sustenance by virtue of the fact that COVID has entered into the situation. In an emergency situation, are we honestly saying that the state
will be reactive?
Will quickly, that somebody doesn't have food tomorrow, somebody doesn't have food to tide them over to the weekend? Are we going to start looking at the merits and demerits of a case and saying then who should be able to take them in a case like COVID, for example? Which many have cited as the reasons why they've been put in a difficult position.
Yes. Yeah, I totally see that angle, and it's true, because the justice process is very slow. Also, this kind of mechanisms are very slow. Again, they may not even have the adequate resources to do it, and so it's that situation that in as much as we have some mechanisms on paper, the actual implementation of those mechanisms is not to the full extent that we would want to. And so it's one of those situations where we have to, that's the way the situation is. And the only way would be then to keep pushing the government to allocate funds, whether it is through court action. Because for organizations like us, the main way that we respond to such situations is by going to court for court to make declarations on rights, so that then government is forced to take up some steps. But again, I agree that there's a very thin line between what you see on the books and what is actually happening on the ground.
The line is not thin, Dr. Mbogoh. The line is as wide as here in Mombasa. What is on paper? And the policy, it's here in front of us. The policy, the social protection policy, for instance, enacted in 2011, breaks down social protection into three categories: social assistance, social security, and medical insurance. Where the state is committing itself to providing social assistance to people who are in need and vulnerable in terms of even losing jobs, losing livelihoods, losing incomes. Not reactive and saying that if this person goes to court and then the court compels us to do, we shall do. No, it's the state being proactive in ensuring that it is ahead of the curve on this. In the particular situation that we are in now, the state is not ahead of the curve. How do we how do we bring the state to the curve?
Before we get it to be ahead of the curve.
How do we bring the state to the curve? The state can only go to the curve again through, in my opinion, is through activism, court action, advocacy, conversations such as this that you're having in the media. I think these are some of the ways that you push the state to actually get to that point. So it's not something that would happen overnight, because this is a historic problem that we have had. So it would mean consistent advocacy, pushing and lobbying, and just to get things the way they are supposed to be. And we're not saying that we're getting government off the hook by talking about limited resources. But I think even as we are trying to consider whether reacting through court action is the best way, some of the times we see this may be posed as a challenge that the court may be forced to say that in this case, progressive realization. So we can see there's a policy in place, you can see there's an action plan in place. So what more would you want for the state to do? So bearing in mind those outcomes that can come from the court, I think sometimes it takes more advocacy and activism coming down from the community itself that can bring the change that we want to see.
Do we have on record any situation where this matter has actually gone to court or has been taken to court?
The matter of
I'm going to give 3 examples. One, simply ensuring that the budget that caters for children and their welfare in this country is actually adequate. B, that the government actually fulfills the mandate that it actually should under social protection. And 3, that it has adequate structures and staff who can ensure that these things are actually implemented.
On that particular issue, I am not sure, but I know that there have been cases that have been presented to court related to the issue of realization of socioeconomic rights, and many cases have been filed through the years. The courts have been very receptive on such matters and making decisions where even governments are supposed to be monitored to see, are they really implementing the policies that they say they're implementing? Have they implemented the action plans? So the court, in some instances, have put in place a monitoring mechanism to see whether these policies are actually being done. So I think...
and who mans this monitoring system?
Where it is detailed by, where it is ordered by the court, then it will be the court itself that monitors, obviously then through the parties that filed the particular case in court.
In the case where, like in this particular rights, there's progressive realization of these rights, and the government has gone ahead and come up with a policy, and then the government has gone ahead and come up with laws and started allocating budgets. Is there a way in which you can say, all right, so you have a policy and this is the timeline with which we expect to start seeing milestones, so that you can put the government to task by saying, from the policy itself, you have milestone number 1 which you have missed, and therefore we can take you to court and compel you to meet that milestone?
Yeah, you can definitely, you can do that. And that can be done even as a new case that where milestones have been set in place. We have a system within the law that can allow you to actually put the government in check as a member of the public or as an organization like ourselves, and put and ask the government to give an account as to how far they have gone in implementing a particular policy or action plan.
Oh, okay.
So that is there, yes.
What about the policies that are published and they don't have milestones on the implementation? Can you compel the government to go back and put milestones in those policies?
Definitely. I said you can do that because the article on implementation of the Constitution allows you to file a constitutional reference to ensure that the rights are enforced. So if the policy then will contribute towards enforcement of a particular human right, you can go and ask government to put in place a monitoring mechanism, and through that monitoring mechanism, you as the member of the public can ensure that it is actually implemented.
Okay. As Kituo now, for example, or other groups that are, mandated by their will to do or to help in situations like this, what would you be able to do for citizens who may come forward with a case whereby they need this help, and we know for a fact that it is not being offered? There's no structure. There's nowhere that honestly, there's nowhere that I can stand up to go to today and make a complaint and say that, unless I go to the chief and then maybe the chief will find some ad hoc way of talking to somebody. There's no way, no structure that I would go to today and ask for this kind of help. Bodies like Kituo, what exactly then would they be able to do for people?
Yeah, I think for us, I would look at it from two angles. The first is to deal with structural issues that have given a rise to such a situation. So for us would be also to empower the community itself to be able to put the government in check. Because now we have government at county level and national level, and communities can be able, through the framework of public participation, put the government in check and see our budget being allocated for their priority concerns. Or if a policy that has been put in place by a county government, is it actually being implemented? Is the particular law responsive to their needs? So what we do is we empower the communities to be able to engage with their governments at county and national level, and to ask relevant questions that would then put government in check and make sure these structural issues like budget allocation and implementation of policy, formulation of policy and law are actually put in place. The other way we would respond is through, because we are a legal organization and we have also other partners, is using the courts to facilitate implementation, or again put the government in check, or force government to institute or set institutions that will ensure that these particular laws and the Constitution is implemented. So we have in the past filed constitutional petitions in court just to address some of these issues on socioeconomic rights. Sometimes we are successful, other times you're not successful. But I think even why the main point would be to just make a statement, grab the attention of government, and so that they can then bring a change. Yeah.
In this particular case of Beatrice Mwende from Naivasha,
yes,
we can see just without even getting deep into it, you can see some breakdown in several factors. Number one, there are children who are living clearly in some danger, because we cannot assume that this just happened one day, that she got up and decided to take the action that she took. So there was no mechanism of detecting what the danger that the children were being subjected to. Secondly, as this was happening, there's also the issue of what was happening to Miss Beatrice Mwende herself. If indeed, after psychiatric examination, she's found to have a mental condition, it also means that there was a failure to detect this, which would have protected the children.
Yeah.
There is what she has raised herself. She says, I got to a point, I lost my job, I had no income, and yet I have 4 children. There's a failure of somewhere of structure that is able to notice there are 4 children in this home, and their mother has no way of earning a livelihood to support them. So those kind of failures, in this particular case of Beatrice Mwende, what can Kituo cha Sheria do to raise the issues, to advocate, and to put the officials who are responsible for this to account?
Yeah. So I think as first mentioned that when we talk of failures, there are failures at many levels in this particular case. Failure by the immediate family, one, to recognize her situation. Failure by her community itself, her neighbors, to do so. Failure by government and also by non-state actors to pick up a situation like that. Because when you talk about children matters, we take the approach, the African approach, that a child is a child to the community, not to a particular parent. So everyone has a responsibility to protect that child at the end of the day. So by these 4 children having lost their lives, the entire community has failed. Government has failed, as we have failed. The families that had immediate family has failed. So we all need to do an internal reflection as to what really happened, and that we all need to kind of take responsibility for what happened. Number 2, as to what we can do as non-state actors. We, as I mentioned earlier, we use the advocacy approach mainly to push government to make changes. So we just to talk about such situations, it requires government to put in place mechanisms that we have already discussed that are just in paper but are not actually on the ground. And finally, I think we as Kituo, we could approach the court for a constitutional reference that mainly seeks to put a monitoring mechanism and put government in check as to obligations that are already set in law and what it's doing about it. I think just by posing these questions, whether it's through a court action or through advocacy and activism, I think that is a step towards improving the situation.
So are you saying that then, I mean, as we wrap this up this morning, are we saying that it's possible to push, I think you've used those 2 words today, push and force government to then institute structures that will essentially serve to the protection of people when it comes to basic needs? Is it possible to do that, push and force, so that government will then institute?
Yes, it is possible to do that. And now our constitution in Article 10 speaks to public participation in all affairs, including government affairs. So we have a right to push government to do what it needs to do so that we can see a much better situation in terms of realization of rights. So we can do that as organizations, as members of the public can do that as well. So I think now just taking that step in a very organized fashion is what we need to set in motion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Annette Mbogoh, for speaking to us.
Thank you too for having me.
Thank you for your insights.
Yeah.
Dr. Annette Mbogoh is the Executive Director of Kituo cha Sheria, a non-governmental organization that advocates better access of justice to all citizens. Have a good day, Dr.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.